The sun was setting as Mike Tyson walked through the crowded airport terminal. People turned their heads, some whispering to each other as they recognized the boxing legend. Mike kept his eyes forward, used to the attention but still preferring his privacy. He was heading to Los Angeles for a charity boxing event where young fighters would get a chance to showcase their talents. Flight 237 to Los Angeles is now boarding first-class passengers. The announcement rang through the terminal. Mike handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, who smiled broadly. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Tyson," she said respectfully. He nodded politely and walked down the jetway. On board, he found his seat, 2A, a window seat in first class that he had specifically requested when booking. Mike liked window seats on planes. They gave him a sense of space and privacy that aisle seats couldn't offer. He settled in, placing his small carry-on under the seat in front of him. The leather seat was spacious and comfortable. Mike took out his phone to check some messages before takeoff. The charity event organizer had sent details about tomorrow's schedule, and Mike was looking forward to meeting the young boxers who looked up to him. Other first-class passengers boarded, some doing double takes when they spotted him. Most were respectful, giving him a nod or a small smile before taking their seats. Mike had just put in his earbuds when he felt a tap on his shoulder. A flight attendant with a tight smile stood beside him. "Excuse me, Mr. Tyson," she said, her voice lowered. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a situation." Mike removed his earbuds. "What's the problem?" he asked calmly. The flight attendant glanced behind her, where a man in an expensive suit stood watching them. "That gentleman is one of our Platinum members. He's requested your specific seat." Mike looked at the man, then back at the attendant. The man was middle-aged with a stern expression that suggested he was used to getting his way. "I booked this seat weeks ago," Mike replied simply. "Yes, I understand that," the attendant said, her smile becoming more strained. "But he flies with us very frequently and has requested this particular seat. We have another first-class seat available." "I specifically asked for a window seat when I booked," Mike interrupted, his voice still even but firmer now. "This is my assigned seat." The attendant's smile faltered. Behind her, the man in the suit crossed his arms, looking impatient. "I understand, Mr. Tyson, but perhaps you wouldn't mind moving just this once. The other seat is very comfortable as well." Mike noticed that several other passengers were now watching the interaction. He also noticed that no other first-class passengers had been asked to move from their assigned seats, only him. He couldn't help but wonder why he was being singled out when he had followed all proper procedures. "I'm sorry, but I prefer to stay in my assigned seat," Mike said, keeping his voice controlled despite his growing frustration. "I chose it specifically for a reason." The flight attendant's face flushed slightly. "I'll need to speak with my supervisor," she said, turning away quickly. As she walked away, Mike overheard the man in the suit mutter something under his breath. The words weren't clear, but the tone was dismissive, entitled. A couple sitting across the aisle gave Mike sympathetic looks. The woman leaned over slightly and whispered, "That's not right. You shouldn't have to move." Mike thanked her with a nod but said nothing. Throughout his career, both in and out of the ring, he had faced many challenges. He knew when to fight and when to keep his cool. This situation called for the latter. A few minutes later, the flight attendant returned with an older man wearing a different uniform, clearly a supervisor. The supervisor had a stern expression as he approached Mike's seat. "Mr. Tyson, I understand there's an issue with the seating arrangement," the supervisor began. "Our Platinum member has specifically requested this seat, and we do try to accommodate our most frequent flyers whenever possible." Mike looked the supervisor directly in the eyes. "I booked this seat in advance. I have the confirmation. Why am I being asked to move when no one else is?" The question hung in the air. Around them, the cabin had grown quieter as passengers tuned in to the unfolding drama. Someone in a row behind had taken out their phone and was recording the interaction. Mike felt a familiar feeling rising in his chest, the feeling he got before a match. But this wasn't a boxing ring. This was something else entirely. The supervisor shifted uncomfortably under Mike's steady gaze. Around them, the plane had gone eerily quiet. Even the usual sounds of luggage being stowed and people settling into their seats seemed to have paused. Mr. Tyson, the supervisor continued, lowering his voice, we value all our customers, but we have certain protocols for our platinum members. Mike raised an eyebrow. So your protocol is to make someone else move from their assigned seat. Someone who booked properly, weeks in advance. By now, more passengers had noticed the growing tension. A woman in the row behind was not so subtly recording the exchange on her phone. Two flight attendants at the front of the cabin whispered to each other, occasionally glancing in Mike's direction. The businessman in the suit stepped forward. Look, it's really not a big deal, he said, his tone condescending. I'd always get this seat. Always, it's just how it works. Mike turned to look at him directly. The businessman took an instinctive step back, perhaps suddenly remembering who he was dealing with. Sir, Mike said calmly, I respect that you fly often, but I booked this seat for a reason. I have back issues from years of boxing, and the window seat gives me the support I need. This wasn't entirely true. Mike just preferred the window, but he wanted to see how they would respond to a health-related concern. The supervisor's face flushed. I wasn't aware of any medical issues, Mr. Tyson. You didn't ask, Mike replied simply. You just assumed I should move. An older gentleman seated across the aisle cleared his throat. I've been flying with this airline for 20 years, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I've never seen a passenger asked to move from their assigned first-class seat for another passenger's preference. Never. The supervisor shot the man an irritated look. Sir, please stay out of this. We're handling the situation. No, you're making a scene is what you're doing, said another passenger, a well-dressed woman who hadn't even looked up from her magazine. The man has his assigned seat. End of story. The businessman's face reddened. Do you people know who I am? I spend more on flights in a month than most of you do in a year. A tense silence followed his outburst. Even the supervisor looked embarrassed. Mike remained composed. Years in the boxing ring had taught him that losing your temper meant losing control. And Mike Tyson had worked too hard on himself over the years to lose control over something like this. Sir, Mike said to the businessman, I don't think this is about the seat anymore, is it? The businessman blinked, caught off guard by the direct question. What's that supposed to mean? Mike shrugged. Just seems strange that out of all the first-class passengers, I'm the one being asked to move. The implication hung in the air. Several passengers exchanged knowing looks. The supervisor, sensing the conversation was heading into dangerous territory, tried to regain control. Mr. Tyson, perhaps we can offer you some compensation for the inconvenience. Free miles or a voucher for your next flight? Mike shook his head. I don't want compensation. I just want to sit in my assigned seat and enjoy my flight like everyone else. Just then, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a slight delay due to a seating issue. We ask for your patience as we sort this out. A collective groan went through the cabin. The delay was affecting everyone now. The supervisor's walkie-talkie crackled. He stepped away to answer it, speaking in hushed tones. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. Mr. Tyson will remain in his assigned seat, he announced stiffly. Sir, he said, turning to the businessman, we've arranged for you to take the other available first-class seat, or if you prefer, we can book you on the next flight where your preferred seat might be available. The businessman stared in disbelief. This is ridiculous. I've never been treated this way. Who did you call? He demanded, looking at Mike. Mike hadn't called anyone yet, but the supervisor had apparently consulted with someone higher up who had made the decision. I'll be filing a formal complaint, the businessman said, snatching his carry-on bag, and canceling my platinum membership. As he stormed off to the other seat, several passengers broke into spontaneous applause. Mike didn't join in. He simply put his earbuds back in and closed his eyes, ready for the flight to finally take off. But the matter was far from over. Mike knew that while he had won this small battle, something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him. He pulled out his phone one last time before the flight attendants came around for the final check. Time to make a call. Mike waited until the businessman had settled into his new seat before reaching for his phone. The fasten seatbelt sign wasn't on yet, and the flight attendants were still preparing for takeoff. He scrolled through his contacts, finding the one he needed. "Excuse me, sir," a different flight attendant approached him cautiously. "We'll be taking off soon. You'll need to switch your phone to airplane mode." "Just one quick call," Mike said politely. "It's important." The flight attendant hesitated, then nodded. "Make it quick, please." Mike dialed the number and waited. 3 rings later, a familiar voice answered. "Tom." "Yeah, it's Mike. Listen, something just happened that I think you should know about." Mike kept his voice low, but several nearby passengers were clearly straining to hear. "I'm on flight 237 right now, and the crew tried to move me from my seat for another passenger." He paused, listening to the response on the other end. "Yeah, that's right. A white businessman. They said he was a platinum member who always gets this seat. When I refused, they'd brought in a supervisor who tried to pressure me." Another pause as Tom spoke. No, I'm still in my seat. They backed down after some other passengers started speaking up." "But Tom, this doesn't feel right. I paid for this seat like everyone else." The businessman was now pretending to read a magazine, but Mike could see him glancing over occasionally. "The supervisor's name." "Hold on." Mike looked at the name tag of the supervisor, who was now avoiding eye contact from the front of the cabin. "It's Richards, and the flight attendant who first approached me was Collins." As Mike continued his conversation, he noticed other staff members whispering and looking his way nervously. "Yeah, I think you should call the airline's corporate office. This isn't just about me. If they're doing this to me, imagine how they treat regular folks who don't have my platform." The elderly man across the aisle gave Mike a thumbs up. He clearly approved of Mike taking action. "Tom, you've been my attorney for 15 years. You know I don't make a fuss unless something's really wrong. And this feels wrong." Mike listened for another moment. "The CEO? You know him personally. Well, if you think that's the best approach." The businessman was now openly staring at Mike, his face a mixture of curiosity and concern. "All right, I trust your judgment. Let me know what happens. I land in LA at 9:30. Thanks, Tom." Mike ended the call and switched his phone to airplane mode just as the fasten seatbelt sign dinged on. He settled back into his seat, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He wasn't trying to get anyone fired, but he couldn't ignore what felt like disrespect based on who he was. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. The supervisor was now seated in the jump seat near the cockpit, looking straight ahead. The flight attendant named Collins was in the galley, frantically whispering to another crew member. An announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We are now third in line for takeoff and should be in the air shortly." A flight attendant approached Mike with a glass of water. "Mr. Tyson, can I get you anything else before takeoff? Perhaps some headphones or a blanket?" The sudden change in service quality wasn't lost on Mike. "No, thank you. I'm fine." As the plane accelerated down the runway, Mike looked out the window. The ground fell away beneath them, the city lights growing smaller. He thought about Tom, his attorney who had stuck with him through thick and thin, always looking out for his best interests. Tom wasn't just a lawyer, but a friend who understood the unique challenges Mike faced as a black celebrity in America. "Was that your lawyer?" the elderly man across the aisle asked as the plane leveled off. Mike nodded. "Good," the man said. "I've been flying for business for 40 years. Never seen anything like what they tried to pull with you. Reminds me of how things were back in the 60s and 70s. Mike appreciated the man's candor. "I'm hoping this can be a learning moment for everyone involved." "Your lawyer, he seems like he's got some pull with the airline?" the man asked. Mike smiled slightly. "Tom doesn't mess around. He knows people in high places." The man chuckled. "Well, I'd love to be a fly on the wall when that call happens." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "Me too." At that moment, his phone vibrated with a text message. He glanced down at it, curious since he thought he put his phone in airplane mode. He must have forgotten. The message was from Tom. "Just got off the phone with the CEO. You won't believe what's happening now. Call me as soon as you land." Mike waited until the businessman had settled into his new seat before reaching for his phone. The fasten seatbelt sign wasn't on yet, and the flight attendants were still preparing for takeoff. He scrolled through his contacts, finding the one he needed. "Excuse me, sir," a different flight attendant approached him cautiously. "We'll be taking off soon. You'll need to switch your phone to airplane mode." "Just one quick call," Mike said politely. "It's important." The flight attendant hesitated, then nodded. "Make it quick, please." Mike dialed the number and waited. 3 rings later, a familiar voice answered. "Tom?" "Yeah, it's Mike. Listen, something just happened that I think you should know about." Mike kept his voice low, but several nearby passengers were clearly straining to hear. "I'm on flight 237 right now, and the crew tried to move me from my seat for another passenger." He paused, listening to the response on the other end. "Yeah, that's right. A white businessman. They said he was a platinum member who always gets this seat. When I refused, they brought in a supervisor who tried to pressure me." Another pause as Tom spoke. No, I'm still in my seat." They'd backed down after some other passengers started speaking up. "But Tom, this doesn't feel right. I paid for this seat like everyone else." The businessman was now pretending to read a magazine, but Mike could see him glancing over occasionally. "The supervisor's name?" "Hold on." Mike looked at the name tag of the supervisor, who was now avoiding eye contact from the front of the cabin. "It's Richards, and the flight attendant who first approached me was Collins." As Mike continued his conversation, he noticed other staff members whispering and looking his way nervously. "Yeah, I think you should call the airline's corporate office. This isn't just about me. If they're doing this to me, imagine how they treat regular folks who don't have my platform." The elderly man across the aisle gave Mike a thumbs up. He clearly approved of Mike taking action. "Tom, you've been my attorney for 15 years. You know I don't make a fuss unless something's really wrong. And this feels wrong." Mike listened for another moment. "The CEO? You know him personally. Well, if you think that's the best approach." The businessman was now openly staring at Mike, his face a mixture of curiosity and concern. "All right, I trust your judgment. Let me know what happens." "I land in LA at 9:30. Thanks, Tom." Mike ended the call and switched his phone to airplane mode just as the fasten seatbelt sign dinged on. He settled back into his seat, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He wasn't trying to get anyone fired, but he couldn't ignore what felt like disrespect based on who he was. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. The supervisor was now seated in the jump seat near the cockpit, looking straight ahead. The flight attendant named Collins was in the galley, frantically whispering to another crew member. An announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We are now third in line for takeoff and should be in the air shortly." A flight attendant approached Mike with a glass of water. "Mr. Tyson, can I get you anything else before takeoff?" "Perhaps some headphones or a blanket." The sudden change in service quality wasn't lost on Mike. "No, thank you. I'm fine." As the plane accelerated down the runway, Mike looked out the window. The ground fell away beneath them, the city lights growing smaller. He thought about Tom, his attorney who had stuck with him through thick and thin, always looking out for his best interests. Tom wasn't just a lawyer, but a friend who understood the unique challenges Mike faced as a black celebrity in America. "Was that your lawyer?" the elderly man across the aisle asked as the plane leveled off. Mike nodded. "Good," the man said. "I've been flying for business for 40 years. Never seen anything like what they tried to pull with you. Reminds me of how things were back in the 60s and 70s. Mike appreciated the man's candor. "I'm hoping this can be a learning moment for everyone involved." "Your lawyer, he seems like he's got some pull with the airline," the man asked. Mike smiled slightly. "Tom doesn't mess around. He knows people in high places." The man chuckled. "Well, I'd love to be a fly on the wall when that call happens." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "Me too." At that moment, his phone vibrated with a text message. He glanced down at it, curious since he thought he put his phone in airplane mode. He must have forgotten. The message was from Tom. "Just got off the phone with the CEO. You won't believe what's happening now. Call me as soon as you land." Mike didn't realize he had fallen asleep until the plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting him awake. He glanced at his watch. They were about halfway to Los Angeles. He looked around the cabin. Most passengers were either sleeping or watching movies on their screens. The businessman who had wanted his seat was typing furiously on a laptop, occasionally shooting glances in Mike's direction. Mike pulled out his phone, forgetting for a moment that he was in the air with no service. But to his surprise, he had signal. The plane must have Wi-Fi. His phone was buzzing with notifications. He raised an eyebrow when he saw what was happening. The video of his confrontation had gone viral. Someone had posted it with the caption, "Mike Tyson stands up to airline discrimination. They tried to make him move for a white passenger." The clip already had over 1 million views, and hashtag #TysonRespect was trending on social media. Mike shook his head slightly. He hadn't planned for this to become a public thing. He just wanted to be treated fairly. As he scrolled through the comments, he saw thousands of messages of support. "This is how they treat a legend? Shame on that airline." Mike handled himself with so much class, respect. If they treat Mike Tyson like this, imagine how they treat regular folks. There were other videos too. Passengers from different sections of the plane had recorded the incident from various angles. One showed the businessman's angry face clearly as he demanded Mike's seat. Another captured the supervisor's dismissive tone. Mike switched over to a news app. 3 major networks had already picked up the story. One headline read, "Boxing legend Mike Tyson faces discrimination on flight." Another said, "Airline under fire after Tyson's seating controversy." His phone buzzed with a text from Tom, "It's everywhere. CEO called me back. They're in full crisis mode." Mike texted back, "Didn't mean for this to blow up. Just wanted to sit in my seat." Tom replied immediately, "Too late. Cat's out of the bag. Social media is on fire." Mike looked up to see a flight attendant, not Collins, but a different one, approaching with a worried expression. "Mr. Tyson," she said quietly, leaning down. "The captain would like to speak with you when it's convenient. He's very concerned about what happened earlier." Mike nodded. "Tell him I'll come up in a few minutes." As the flight attendant walked away, the elderly man across the aisle leaned over. "Damage control," he whispered with a knowing smile. "I've been watching the news on my tablet. You're trending everywhere." Mike sighed. "Not what I planned for my evening." "Sometimes the world needs to see these things," the man said. "Makes people think twice about how they treat others." A young woman a few rows ahead turned around. "Mr. Tyson, I just wanted to say I think you handled that situation with real dignity. My brother is a huge fan. He's not going to believe I was on this flight." Mike thanked her with a nod. More passengers were looking at him now, some giving thumbs-up gestures, others smiling in support. Word had clearly spread throughout the plane. After a few minutes, Mike got up and made his way toward the cockpit. The flight attendants stepped aside respectfully. He noticed Collins, the attendant who had first asked him to move, was nowhere to be seen. The captain was waiting for him just outside the cockpit door. He was an older man with gray hair and a concerned expression. "Mr. Tyson," he said, extending his hand. "I want to personally apologize for what happened during boarding. I was informed after we were airborne, or I would have stepped in sooner." Mike shook his hand. "Appreciate that, but I'm not looking for special treatment, just equal treatment." The captain nodded gravely. "I understand. I want you to know that's not how we train our staff to handle seating assignments. I've been with this airline for 27 years, and I'm deeply troubled by what occurred." "Have you spoken to your headquarters?" Mike asked. The captain's face turned grim. "Yes. There's quite a storm brewing there. Our CEO has called an emergency meeting with the board. The videos are causing a PR nightmare." Mike hadn't intended to cause such chaos, but a part of him was glad the incident wasn't being swept under the rug. "I've been instructed to tell you that the airline will be reaching out through your attorney to make this right," the captain continued. "Though I suspect no amount of free miles is going to fix this situation." "It's not about compensation," Mike said. "It's about respect." "I understand," the captain replied. "And for what it's worth, so is our CEO now. There will be changes coming, I can guarantee that." As Mike turned to go back to his seat, the captain added, "Mr. Tyson, thank you for handling this with such class. Many people would have lost their cool." Mike gave a small smile. "I've had enough fights in my life to know which ones are worth having." When Mike returned to his seat, he had several more text messages. One was from the charity organizer in LA. "Just saw the news. You're fighting the good fight even before you get here." Another was from Tom. "CEO wants to speak directly when you land. And every news outlet in the country wants your statement. Want me to set up a quick press conference at LAX?" Mike texted back, "No press conference, just a short statement. This isn't about me getting attention." As he put his phone away, he noticed the businessman who had wanted his seat was now actively avoiding looking in his direction. The man seemed smaller somehow, shrunk by the weight of public opinion turning against him. The rest of the flight passed uneventfully. But Mike knew that once he landed, this story was just beginning. The landing at LAX was smooth, but Mike could feel the tension in the air. As soon as the plane touched down, phones throughout the cabin lit up as passengers reconnected with the world. The murmurs grew louder as people saw just how big the story had become. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles International Airport," the captain announced over the intercom. "Local time is 9:27 p.m. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off." Then, breaking from the usual script, he added, "And on behalf of the entire airline, I want to apologize for the unprofessional conduct witnessed during boarding. That's not who we are, and it's not what we stand for." Several passengers glanced at Mike, then at the businessman, who was now staring straight ahead, his face flushed with embarrassment. As the plane taxied to the gate, Mike received another text from Tom, "I'm waiting at the terminal. There are reporters everywhere." The airline's corporate communications VP is here too. Mike sighed. He just wanted to get to his hotel and prepare for tomorrow's charity event. Now he had to deal with all this. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, no one rushed to get up as they normally would. Instead, many passengers seemed to be waiting to see what would happen next. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please allow Mr. Tyson to deplane first. Thank you for your cooperation." The businessman who had wanted Mike's seat quickly gathered his things, clearly wanting to escape before Mike left. But as he tried to move into the aisle, other passengers blocked his way with their bags and bodies, forcing him to wait. Mike stood up, nodding gratefully to those around him who had shown support. The elderly man across the aisle extended his hand. "Been a pleasure watching you handle this with such dignity, champ," he said warmly. Mike shook his hand. "Thanks for speaking up when it mattered." As Mike walked toward the front of the plane, other passengers offered words of encouragement. A middle-aged woman touched his arm gently. "My son's a young black athlete. Seeing you stand up like that matters." At the door of the plane, the captain and the remaining flight crew were lined up. The captain again extended his hand. "Mr. Tyson, I've spoken further with our headquarters. The CEO wants you to know that he's personally looking into this matter." Mike nodded. "Good to hear." As he stepped into the jetway, Mike could see through the windows that there was indeed a crowd gathering at the gate. He took a deep breath and continued walking. The moment he emerged into the terminal, camera flashes went off. A group of reporters surged forward, but were held back by airport security. Tom, Mike's attorney, pushed through the crowd to reach him. "This blew up even bigger than I expected," Tom said, shaking Mike's hand firmly. "The airline's in damage control mode. That's that VP of corporate communications over there." He nodded toward a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit who was speaking frantically into his phone. "What's the latest?" Mike asked as they began walking, security clearing a path through the terminal. "The CEO reviewed the footage and has already placed the supervisor and flight attendant on leave pending investigation. But here's the interesting part. He also ordered an internal review of all similar complaints filed over the past 5 years. Mike raised an eyebrow. And they found a pattern. Turns out there have been at least a dozen similar incidents reported, mostly involving passengers of color. Several involving that same supervisor, Richards. Mike shook his head. "So I wasn't imagining it." "Definitely not. And with your situation going viral, other people are coming forward with their stories. One woman was bumped from her first-class seat just last month in almost identical circumstances. They reached a quieter area of the terminal where a small group of airline officials were waiting. The VP of Corporate Communications stepped forward, his hand extended. "Mr. Tyson, first let me express our deepest apologies for what happened today. Our CEO is personally handling this situation and would like to speak with you directly, if you're willing." Mike looked at Tom, who nodded slightly. "I'll talk to him," Mike said, "but not here." I have an event tomorrow morning that's important to me. Mike woke up early the next morning, despite the late night. The charity boxing event for underprivileged youth started at 10 a.m., and he wanted to be fully present for the kids. He checked his phone and wasn't surprised to see hundreds of notifications. The story had only grown overnight. He scrolled through a few news headlines while sipping his coffee. Airline faces backlash after Tyson incident. Social media rallies behind Mike Tyson in airline dispute. Former boxing champ shows class in face of discrimination. His phone rang. It was Tom. "Morning, Mike. You seen the news?" "Just checking it now. Seems like it's everywhere." "That's not the half of it," Tom said. "The airline CEO has been trying to reach you since dawn. And there's something else you should know." Mike took another sip of coffee. "What's that?" "They fired them. All of them. The entire team involved in yesterday's incident." Mike sat up straighter. "What? Already? Without an investigation?" Apparently the CEO reviewed all the videos and decided they didn't need more evidence. The flight attendant, the supervisor, even the gate agent who let it happen, all gone. Mike wasn't sure how to feel about this. That seems extreme. "There's more," Tom continued. "Remember I told you they were looking into past complaints? Turns out that supervisor, Richards, had 5 previous incidents reported against him, all involving passengers of color being asked to move or getting downgraded. The airline kept it quiet, giving him additional training each time." Mike shook his head. "So it took a celebrity for them to actually do something?" "Exactly. And now they're in full panic mode. The CEO wants to talk to you about being part of their new diversity training program. They're offering a substantial donation to your charity too." Mike looked at the time. He needed to get ready for the event. "Tell him I'll call back this afternoon. The kids come first today." "Will do." "And Mike, you're trending #1 worldwide, just so you know." After hanging up, Mike got dressed and headed downstairs. A car was waiting to take him to the community center where the boxing event was being held. As they drove through there, Mike noticed people pointing at his car, some even taking pictures. The story had clearly spread far and wide. When they arrived at the community center, a crowd of reporters was waiting outside. Mike sighed. This was supposed to be about the kids, not about his airline incident. As he stepped out of the car, the reporters surged forward, shouting questions. "Mike, what's your response to the firings? Did you ask for those employees to be terminated? Will you be suing the airline?" Mike raised his hands for quiet. "I'm here for these young boxers today. That's what matters to me right now. I'll address everything else later." He pushed through the crowd and entered the community center. Inside, everything changed. Dozens of young boxers, mostly from low-income neighborhoods, were warming up in the ring and on training equipment. When they saw Mike, their faces lit up with excitement. A boy about 12 years old approached shyly. "Mr. Tyson, I saw what happened on your flight. My dad said you stood up for yourself just like you tell us to do." Mike smiled and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Sometimes the most important fights happen outside the ring. It's about keeping your dignity and standing up for what's right." The boy nodded solemnly. "I want to be like that too." For the next few hours, Mike focused entirely on the young boxers, teaching techniques, sharing stories from his career, and encouraging them to stay disciplined both in and out of the ring. He posed for photos with each participant and signed their gloves. These moments, seeing hope and determination in young eyes, were what mattered most to him. During a break, the event organizer approached Mike. "The airline CEO is actually here. He came personally and asked if he could speak with you when you have a moment." Mike raised his eyebrows in surprise. "He came here?" "Yes, he's waiting in the office. Says it's important." Mike glanced at the kids, still practicing in the rings. "Tell him I'll see him after we're done here. These kids get my full attention until then." The organizer nodded and walked away. A few minutes later, Mike noticed a man in an expensive suit watching from the doorway. Their eyes met briefly before Mike turned his attention back to a young girl who was showing him her jab technique. By mid-afternoon, as the event was winding down, Mike finally agreed to meet with the airline CEO. They sat in a small office at the back of the community center. "Mr. Tyson," the CEO began, "first, let me personally apologize for what happened on our flight. It was unacceptable, and we've taken immediate action. Mike nodded. So I heard. You fired the entire team. We had to. What happened to you wasn't an isolated incident, as we've now discovered. It was part of a pattern that we should have addressed long ago. And it took me to make you see it? Mike asked pointedly. The CEO had the decency to look embarrassed. Unfortunately, yes. Sometimes it takes a high-profile incident to expose problems that have been festering. I'm not proud of that fact. Mike leaned forward. Those people you fired, they're just symptoms of a bigger problem. I agree completely, the CEO said, surprising Mike with his candor. That's why I'm here. I want to talk about making real changes, not just damage control. As they continued talking, Mike realized this wasn't just a PR stunt. The CEO seemed genuinely shaken by what had been uncovered and determined to make meaningful changes. By the end of their conversation, Mike had agreed to serve on a newly formed Customer Experience Advisory Board focused on ensuring equitable treatment for all passengers. When Mike finally left the community center that evening, he felt oddly at peace. What had started as an unpleasant incident had somehow turned into an opportunity to create real change. Sometimes, he reflected, standing your ground was about more than just yourself. It was about all the people who would come after you. 3 months had passed since the airplane incident, and Mike found himself back at the same airport, heading to another charity event. So much had changed since that day. He walked through the terminal, noticing how staff members smiled at him with genuine respect rather than the nervous recognition he used to receive. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Flight all set. Any problems, call me immediately. Mike smiled. Tom was still protective, even though they both knew another incident was unlikely. The airline had undergone a massive transformation over the past few months. As Mike approached the check-in counter, a young woman greeted him. Good morning, Mr. Tyson. We have you in first class, seat 2A as requested. Mike thanked her and headed to security. As he walked, he noticed a large poster on the wall that hadn't been there before. All passengers deserve respect. It was part of the airline's new campaign that had been launched with Mike's input. At the gate, the attendant scanned his boarding pass and said, Thank you for your help in making our airline better, Mr. Tyson. My cousin was moved from her seat last year too. Things are different now. On board, Mike settled into his window seat. The difference in atmosphere was striking. The flight attendants were treating every passenger with the same level of courtesy, regardless of their appearance or status. He watched as an elderly woman was helped to her seat with patience and kindness. The airline had completely overhauled its training program. Mike had participated in some of the sessions, sharing his experience and helping to create scenarios for staff to practice handling. His involvement had been covered widely in the press, turning what could have been just another discrimination story into a narrative about positive change. A flight attendant approached with a bottle of water. Mr. Tyson, it's an honor to have you on board. I just completed the new training program last month. It's changed how we approach everything. Mike nodded. Glad to hear it's making a difference. It really is. We actually had a situation last week where a passenger wanted someone else's seat. The gate agent handled it perfectly, explained our policy clearly and stood firm. No drama. As the plane took off, Mike thought about the ripple effects of that day. The story had sparked conversations nationwide about everyday discrimination. Other airlines had launched their own reviews, and several had reached out to the advisory board Mike now served on for guidance. He pulled out a folder from his carry-on. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from people who had experienced similar situations but never had the platform to speak up. They thanked him for standing his ground that day. Some wrote about how they now felt empowered to politely but firmly assert their rights when traveling. One letter in particular had touched him deeply. A father had written about explaining the incident to his 10-year-old son, who was struggling with bullying at school. I showed him the video of how you handled yourself with dignity, the man had written. You didn't yell or get angry. You just stood your ground calmly. My son said it was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. Now when kids bother him, he says he tries to be like Mike Tyson on that plane. Mike smiled at the memory. Of all his accomplishments in the ring, somehow this quiet moment of dignity had resonated with people in ways he never expected. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from the CEO of the airline. Just got the quarterly report. Complaints about discriminatory treatment down 78%. Customer satisfaction up 23%. Thank you for pushing us to be better. The businessman who had demanded Mike's seat that day had eventually issued a public apology after being recognized in the viral videos. He claimed the incident had been a wake-up call for him. Mike wasn't sure if the man had truly changed or was just trying to save face, but either way, it was another conversation started. As for the fired employees, Mike had actually insisted that they be offered a chance at retraining and reinstatement if they were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and commit to change. Two had taken the opportunity and were now back at work, reportedly transformed by the experience. The supervisor, Richards, had declined and instead sued the airline for wrongful termination. His case was quickly dismissed when the pattern of complaints against him came to light. The plane reached cruising altitude, and Mike gazed out the window at the clouds below. Sometimes life's most important victories happened in the most unexpected places. Not in a boxing ring with thousands watching, but in a first-class cabin, simply by refusing to move. His work with the airline was expanding. Next month, they were launching a scholarship program for underrepresented youth interested in aviation careers. The idea had come from one of their discussions about addressing diversity issues at every level of the company, not just customer service. A young man across the aisle recognized Mike and gave him a respectful nod. Mike nodded back. There was a time when people knew him only for his boxing career or for the controversies that had plagued his earlier life. Now, especially among younger people, he was increasingly recognized for his dignity, his growth, and his willingness to stand up for what was right. It wasn't about being a celebrity who demanded special treatment. It was about being a human being who expected and helped create a world where everyone was treated with basic respect. As the flight attendant passed by, she paused. "Mr. Tyson, I just wanted to say thank you again. My brother works at another airline, and they're now implementing similar training because of what happened with you. It's changing the whole industry." Mike smiled. "That's good to hear. That's really good to hear. Sometimes the biggest fights weren't won with your fists, but with your dignity. And sometimes just refusing to move from your seat could help others find theirs."